A bullied boy with tumors asked, "Why does no one love me?" No one answered until Dwayne Johnson walked into his classroom and changed everything forever. Malik was only 12, but he had already learned how to walk with his head down, not because he was shy, but because it hurt to see how people looked at him. His small body was covered in soft, visible tumors, his arms, his neck, even his face. The doctors called it neurofibromatosis type 1, but the kids at school called it something else. Gross, weird, disgusting. Every day Malik wore the same hoodie, pulled tight around his face to cover the parts he could. It didn't work, but it gave him a small sense of control, a thin shield between him and the world. He lived in a small apartment with his mother Zoya, a kind, exhausted woman who worked 2 shifts at the hospital and still came home in time to ask him about his day. Malik always said it was fine, even when it wasn't, especially when it wasn't. He didn't want her to worry more than she already did. Zoya knew. She always knew. She saw the way he lingered by the mirror before school, how he sighed when he couldn't tie the hoodie tight enough to hide the tumors on his neck. She saw how quiet he had become. His laugh had once filled every room. Now it came in whispers, if it came at all. But there was one thing that could still light up Malik's face. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Malik watched his videos every single night. He had posters on his wall and an old action figure with a missing arm that he still carried in his backpack like treasure. "The Rock doesn't care what people say," Malik would whisper under his breath. "He just keeps going." It wasn't just admiration, it was survival. It was how Malik reminded himself to keep showing up, even when the world made him feel invisible. Every night, Zoya would peek into his room to see him smiling quietly at the screen, mouthing along with the lines. She'd kiss his forehead and whisper, "You're my brave boy." He'd nod, even when he didn't feel it, even when everything inside him ached to be someone, anyone else. Malik didn't know it yet, but the world was about to hear his name, and it would start with one heartbreaking question no one expected to hear from a boy his age. Why does no one love me? It was a Tuesday, just another school day. Malik had convinced himself he could survive, like all the others. He sat at the very back of the class, his hoodie pulled up, sleeves tugged over his hands, trying to disappear behind a math workbook he'd already finished. He didn't speak unless he was called on. He didn't raise his hand, and most of all, he didn't look up. That day, the teacher announced a new group project. Groans filled the room. Names were read out. Group after group formed until only one name remained uncalled, Malik's. The teacher hesitated, clearly flustered, and then said, "Malik, you can join Group 5. 3 boys from the group groaned out loud. One of them, a tall boy named Caleb, didn't even whisper when he muttered, "Why do we always get stuck with the freak?" A few kids laughed under their breath. Malik froze. He wasn't surprised, but the sting still cut deep, like it always did. The teacher said nothing, just looked away and continued like nothing had happened. Malik stood there for a moment, then walked slowly to his desk and sat down. Caleb leaned over and nudged his friend, loud enough for Malik to hear. "Don't let him touch anything. We don't want tumor germs." A few giggles, a few snickers, and then silence. Malik said nothing, but something inside him cracked. The project began, but Malik didn't speak. He pretended to write notes. His hands shook slightly as he tried to focus. He kept his eyes locked on the paper, but his mind was elsewhere, spiraling. The words rang in his head louder than any school bell. Freak, germs, don't touch. At lunch, he sat alone again. He took out his sandwich, but didn't eat. His stomach twisted with something heavier than hunger. Later that afternoon, during homeroom, the teacher asked the class to share one thing they were proud of. One by one, the kids stood and spoke. Malik remained quiet. Then the teacher called his name. He didn't move. "Malik, one thing you're proud of?" He looked up, eyes glassy. For a moment no one moved. No one spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that made the entire class stop breathing. "Why does no one love me?" Silence. Complete silence. No snickers, no giggles. Just the quiet weight of guilt and shame settling over every corner of the room. The teacher opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A few students looked down. One girl began to cry. Malik didn't wait for anyone to respond. He just lowered his head, pulled his hood tighter, and stared at his desk. In the front row, someone had been recording the class moments earlier, a cruel habit that many students had picked up. They hadn't meant to capture what they did, but what they filmed next would reach far beyond the walls of that classroom. The video started with laughter, faint and immature. It showed a classroom of kids slouching in their seats, clearly bored. But then the camera shifted. It caught a boy sitting in silence, hood up, shoulders small. The moment came without warning. A teacher's voice, a question, then that one line. "Why does no one love me?" It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. It was heartbreak, spoken softly. The clip was posted by a student, likely for attention, but it struck a chord. Within hours, it spread across social media. People commented in disbelief, others in anger. Celebrities were tagged. People begged someone, anyone, to do something for the boy who had just broken the internet's heart. And then it reached a man who had always said he stood for the underdog. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was in the middle of a busy shoot when his assistant walked in, holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said. He glanced at the screen just for a second, but he didn't look away. He watched the clip once, then again, and then again. He didn't say much, just stared at the boy, the way his voice trembled, the way he kept his eyes low, like even hope had stopped visiting him. "Find him," Dwayne said quietly. "I want to know his name, his school, everything." The assistant nodded, already typing. Dwayne sat back, silent. The world saw him as a giant, muscles, fame, power. But right now, all he could think about was the little boy who felt unloved in a world that should have been lifting him up. He had been that boy once too, not with tumors, but with struggles people never saw. He knew what it felt like to be laughed at, ignored, forgotten. He didn't want headlines, he didn't want cameras. He just wanted to sit beside that kid and make sure he knew that someone saw him, that someone loved him. And so, while the world kept scrolling and sharing, Dwayne was already planning something the internet would never expect. He was going to that classroom. Alone. It was Thursday morning, 2 days after the video went viral. The school was quiet as always. Nothing seemed different. Just another morning of students dragging their feet through the halls, teachers preparing lessons, and Malik slipping into class with his hoodie pulled tight, hoping not to be noticed. He sat in his usual seat, last row near the window. His eyes were tired and his shoulders were heavy. He hadn't said a word since the question left his lips 2 days ago. "Why does no one love me?" That moment still echoed in the room like it had just happened. The energy in the class had shifted, but no one really knew what to say to him. Most kids still didn't even make eye contact. Then, just before homeroom started, the door opened. The teacher turned toward it, expecting the usual late student, but she froze mid-sentence. Her face changed completely. The class turned to look, and silence fell like a wave. Standing in the doorway was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. No security, no camera crew, just him. He stepped inside slowly, offering a warm smile to the stunned classroom. Some students gasped, others looked around as if trying to make sure they weren't dreaming. "Hey," Dwayne said, his deep voice calm and gentle. "I'm looking for someone. Is Malik here?" Malik's head lifted slowly, confused. His eyes met Dwayne's for just a second, before quickly lowering again, like he didn't believe it was real, like his brain was trying to protect him from being disappointed. But Dwayne didn't wait. He walked past the rows of desks straight to the back of the class and pulled a chair next to Malik's. "Mind if I sit here, champ?" Malik didn't answer. He just nodded slightly. The classroom was so quiet you could hear every breath. Dwayne leaned in and spoke softly so only Malik could hear. "I saw your video," he said, "and I just want you to know I've been where you are. Not the same way, but I know how it feels to think you're alone." Malik looked up. His eyes were already full. He tried to blink back the tears, but one slipped down his cheek. Dwayne continued, "You said something the other day that broke my heart. You asked why no one loves you." He paused. "Let me answer that for you." And then he stood up and turned to the class. "This young man," he said, pointing gently to Malik, "has more strength than I've ever seen in a ring. He walks into this school every day knowing he's going to be stared at, talked about, laughed at, and yet he still shows up." He looked at each student, eyes steady. "Tell me that's not the definition of brave." A few students lowered their heads. Some were already crying. Dwayne turned back to Malik and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not invisible. You're not unloved. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." And in that moment, Malik believed it. The room remained silent after Dwayne finished speaking, not the kind of silence that follows surprise, but the kind that comes when hearts are full and words fall short. Malik sat frozen, still trying to make sense of what was happening. His chest was tight, but not from pain this time, from something else, something that felt like the very thing he had given up on: being seen. Dwayne knelt down beside him so they were eye to eye. "You don't need to change a single thing about yourself to be worthy of love," he said gently. "You've already earned the title of champion." Malik couldn't speak. His lips trembled and his hands clutched the sleeves of his hoodie tightly. He had spent years shrinking into corners, hiding behind fabric and silence. Now here he was, with the one person he looked up to most in the world, not just sitting beside him, but standing up for him. The tears finally spilled over, and this time, he didn't wipe them away. Dwayne reached into a small bag he'd carried in with him and pulled out something wrapped in black cloth. He handed it to Malik. "This is for you." Malik slowly unwrapped it, his hands still shaking. Inside was a custom-made wrestling belt, sleek and shiny, with bold letters across the front that read, "Malik the Brave." Gasps filled the room. One of the boys who had laughed at Malik earlier now had tears in his eyes. Another girl near the front was already sobbing into her hands. Dwayne stood and raised the belt with one hand, announcing, "This is what a real champion looks like, not because of how he looks on the outside, but because of who he is when no one's watching." At that moment, Malik's mother rushed into the room. The school had called her when Dwayne showed up, and she had dropped everything to get there. Her eyes locked onto her son, his tear-streaked face, his trembling hands holding the belt, the glow that hadn't been there for months. She covered her mouth and burst into tears. Dwayne walked over, gave her a quiet nod, then turned back to the class. "From today," he said, "no one in this room gets to say they've never met a hero, because you just sat beside one." The room was no longer silent. It was filled with soft crying, with guilt, with warmth, and with something else. Change. Word about Dwayne's visit spread quickly, but not because he posted about it. In fact, he didn't say a word online for days. It was Malik's classmates who started talking. One by one, they began to share the story, not just about the rock walking in, but about the boy they had ignored for years and the strength they never saw until that day. The clip of Malik holding his custom belt found its way to social media, this time shared with respect and love. Comments flooded in. Messages of support, apologies, and admiration came from around the world. But Malik didn't care about going viral. For the first time in his life, people at school were looking him in the eyes and seeing him. Really seeing him. Even Caleb, the boy who had called him names, walked up to him the next day and quietly said, "I'm sorry, Malik. I was wrong." Dwayne eventually posted one picture, just Malik, holding the belt with the caption, "Real strength looks like this." But that wasn't all. A week later, Dwayne announced the launch of a scholarship program under Malik's name for kids with visible conditions who had once been made to feel invisible. It was the school's year-end assembly, and for the first time ever, Malik stood at the front of the stage, not hidden, not covered, but proud. The same boy who once sat in silence with his head down now held his championship belt across his chest as the crowd cheered. His hoodie was off. His smile was real. And beside him, his mother wiped tears from her cheeks, beaming with pride. The principal stepped aside to let Malik speak. He looked out at his classmates, some of whom had once ignored him, others who had since become friends. His voice was soft but steady. "I used to think no one saw me," he said, "but now I know I was never the problem. The world just needed to learn how to see better." And from the back of the room, Dwayne stood quietly, arms folded, eyes full. He didn't need to say a word. Malik had already said everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that truly matter. And before you go, make sure to watch the videos on your screen right now. Each one is filled with moments that will stay with you long after they end.